You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. And I want to thank our over 2 million American patriots who are standing with us, shoulder to shoulder, to help preserve our great nation. And I said this to you folks last week, that we do have a president who promised us unity. And in my opinion, he has done everything but unify our country. I think it's unfortunate that we have a sitting president who seems to care more about his own agenda than the people. And just some quick examples, folks, to remind you. And I spoke with Alan West just last week, and he confirmed, Alan West, great man. He's going to be running for governor of Texas. But he said to me, I don't think that our president understands that over 65% of black voters are for and in favor of voter ID. Another fact that he tends to ignore is that over 70% of American people believe that illegal immigration presents a grave threat to the future of our country. And he ignores the will of the people in states like Texas who need border control measures put in place. Biden seems to believe that government knows better than you and me. And the slogan, "My body, my choice," is only good for those who seek abortion. But the same slogan, "My body, my choice," is anti-American if we refuse the COVID vaccine. Think about that. I mentioned I had the opportunity to speak with Alan West. He is a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel. And Alan West took office in January 2011 as the first African-American Republican member of Congress from Florida since Josiah T. Walls, I believe it was, left office in 1876. And what Colonel West shared with me was really interesting. He said, "Do you know how to respond when someone says to you, Black Lives Matter?" And to him I replied, "Well, of course they do. All lives matter." And to that, Colonel West said, "I have a better answer." He said, "Ask them, do Black lives killed inside the womb matter? Do the thousands of Black lives lost by Black-on-Black crime matter? And do Black conservative lives matter? Do the Black lives who disagree with critical race theory matter?" And I thought that that was a really good way to respond to those kinds of questions. Now, with me here today to discuss more of this, as well as President Biden's terrible track record and foreign policy decisions, is AMAC's very own spokesman, Bobby Charles. Bobby was former Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs under Colin Powell. Bobby, welcome today. I love our show and our segment. We call it Reb and Rob on Truth and History. Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you, Rebecca. And your introduction was perfect. And let me just say, we've got a lot of truth and history in front of us right now. So
absolutely. And so, Bobby, your life history, especially as Assistant Secretary of State and conducting oversight for Congress, took you around the world, took you to many rough spots. And I know that you spent time in Afghanistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, but also in this hemisphere, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru. And from where I sit, Bobby, America's foreign policy seems to be in great disarray. The Biden team is not making just one or two errors, but they seem to be making errors literally everywhere. So I wanted to ask for you to take us through your analysis of what's going on in Afghanistan. And let's also talk about Iran, China, and of course, Cuba, because Cuba's been on the minds of many, many people.
Well, you're right, and I want to kind of blend your introduction with that opening question and say that Rebecca, freedom is always, and we know this as AMAC members and those that are still fighting, but freedom is always under fire. There's not going to come a day when it's not under fire here at home or abroad. And we have waves and retreating waves, depending on how hard we fight against it. So overseas right now, we have what amounts to a confluence of major errors that, to my view, are turning into almost like a perfect storm, if you will, of foreign policy stumbles. And I'm just hoping we don't land on our face with someone taking advantage of us. Let's walk through some of the ones you just mentioned. Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we initiated a precipitous pull out without a peace accord. It is a difficult place, but as I've said again and again to people, it is easier to put your finger in the dike than it is to let the dike crack, break, and we lose everything and have to go back, or in the region have to get back involved again. The right thing to have done would be to have done what we did after World War II and keep a tripwire there of a certain number of people, keep working on the peace accord. We've lost 80% of the country since Biden left to Taliban. We are seeing women and children just brutalized. We are seeing commandos that we trained executed on the spot. All of those pictures, all of that reality belongs to Joe Biden. And so I think people need to understand that it's not just Afghanistan. Afghanistan becomes two or three things all of a sudden. It becomes a locus, a black hole of instability. The terrorist groups are going there. They are there. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, groups that I won't even name that are smaller. And their goal is obviously not only to take over that government, to flip it, to make immaterial all of our prior efforts, but to also persecute the people and to create a power projection platform for future terrorism. But that's what they're doing. We also know that China is taking advantage of Afghanistan. There are some $3 trillion worth of minerals in there. And their goal is to go in, secure a very small area. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about collateral damage. They don't have any press covering them. They're going to go. And then on top of that, China aims to create a kind of a go-between between Peshawar, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, so they can do more of their Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, what did Biden do? Just in Afghanistan, he created a mess, a disaster for our foreign policy. How did he add to that? Well, he has given the signal to China that they can do just about anything they want. So what did he do? He pulled the carrier battle group Reagan out. He put it in the Persian Gulf. And we don't secure countries with an individual carrier. That just doesn't work. That's not how we. And you're not going to leave that carrier there forever. So that was sort of a fig leaf to say we're going to put a carrier in there to make everything good. No, it doesn't make everything good. And what did it do? It opened up the South China Sea. And just as we predicted on this program about 2 weeks ago, if you open up the South China Sea and you have no carrier battle group there for the first time since 2003, China's going to get eager. And what did they do? They chased an American battleship out of that water. So there's China. China is also taking advantage of us across the region and around the world. In Peru, we just lost yesterday. The State Department essentially threw the towel in and said, we're not going to talk about voter integrity. We're not going to talk about the fact that in a country of 32 million people, 40,000 votes appear to have been fraudulently cast. All we're going to do is say, yep, the Marxist wins. So for the first time in virtually the history of Peru, after we've spent decades making it a peaceful, wonderful tourist. I've spent weeks and weeks in there working with the people from north to south. They're wonderful people. They love America. What do we got now? We've got a Marxist government, which is going to legalize cocaine and bring back the shining path. That's wonderful. Now we've got Cuba. What's going on in Cuba? The people protest and say, look, we want freedom for the first time in decades, and we should be standing up and giving them freedom. Instead, what are we doing? We're reevaluating whether the embargo that says that communism should not be rewarded because it's ruthless should somehow be lifted. No, what should be lifted is communism. In Cuba. So, Colombia is also in trouble. What we've got is a foreign policy in disarray. And we now have the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, inviting the UN to come in and announce why we're so racist.
Yes.
They need to look at our magazine, Rebecca.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it does, we need to be looking at places like Peru. We need to see how a very preventable collapse this country is about to, completely fall to Marxists.
Right.
And the tough part about it for me, Bobby, is that oftentimes people here in America, we've got these homegrown groups like a Black Lives Matter. Dare I call them a terrorist organization? But I only say that because they're about dividing Americans. And the very things that they say that they fight for, if you really read between the lines, it certainly doesn't seem that way. One of my associates this morning actually said, get a load of this, Ben & Jerry's. Black Lives Matter is applauding Ben & Jerry's for not selling ice cream in certain territories and land that they believe are occupied illegally by Israelis in Palestine. So, I think that if you don't understand the real facts, it's easy to sort of fall into a trap, right? And but if we look at what's going on, we have to realize that our great republic and our freedoms here, it's so important that we protect our rights and our individual rights. because that is what makes America so great. And we're seeing more and more groups that are moving away from the individual rights that our Constitution and our Bill of Rights afford us. And you're right. The magazine that we've got coming out, Bobby, is just it's a great magazine. So I'm going to give everybody a sneak peek of that magazine in just a few moments. But what can people do, in your opinion? What can people do for those that are listening? One idea, a member wrote in and said, send us more. It costs a lot of money to get that magazine out there in front of people. But what would you recommend people do?
I think you've made perhaps the most persuasive argument of all, and that is to get a grip on the facts. We can talk about the facts tied to education, which I know we're likely to. We can talk about America rising. There are a number of areas in which Americans are speaking up right now. They're going to their school boards. They're going to their city governments. They're actually running for their school boards. They're telling cities across the country, hey, stop defunding the police. I need the police. By the way, most of the people being vocal in that regard are minorities and minority businesses, which are saying, don't leave me out here alone. Yes, gun ownership is rising, but that's only an indicia. That's only an indicator. That's only a fact. And there are a lot of facts. Just go on Google. How many guns are now being bought by women and minorities legally with their FBI checks because they don't trust the community policing forces. They don't trust the defunding politicians that are taking away the security that they always had. We have other areas where, Americas are rising. Border security, religious freedom. They're suing to get their religious freedom. And the Supreme Court, by the way, has issued a long string here, what the New York Times even had to call a winning streak when it came to the idea of religious liberty. People are standing up and saying, look, I deserve that. Election integrity, Second Amendment. All of those are areas where people can move. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is what you said a minute ago. And that is, Rebecca, we have to confidently, as Americans, never mind conservative Americans, we need to get a grip on the facts. So just a few off the top of my head that relate to this idea that somehow we're racist and that we need to constantly default to this Black Lives Matter idea, which is really a Marxist group. Go on and look at their website. They're very self-avowed Marxists. They want to flip the United States. These are not people. That group is not a group like Antifa that somehow want reform. That's not what they're interested in. So let's look at the data point.
Yeah. And I just want to interrupt quickly to say that Black Lives Matter is against charter schools. They are fully support critical race theory. And Bobby, you and I share such real concern for the state of America's public education and the speed with which we are losing control over it. So there are so many excuses that are being made, and our future is being compromised. I want to show everyone a picture of the magazine. This is an issue on critical race theory, and we cover 7 hard truths, an article written by you, Bobby, in this magazine. It's the center story, and it really is you're going to find the information here, I think, easy to read, factual, and we must share it. I'm going to encourage everyone who gets the Amac magazine to please, after you've read it, pass it on. Don't throw it away, because the information in here is so important. And Bobby, you come from a whole family of teachers, and you've taught in the university setting yourself. You recently wrote, as I said, about so many of these reasons why critical race theory is dangerous. So can you discuss and share with people what is really happening? Because a lot of, AMAC is a 50-plus organization, although we do work for all Americans, and we encourage people under 50 to join. But if you're in my age bracket, right, it's been a long time maybe since you've sat in a classroom setting. And so I want you to share with us what is really happening, why does it matter, and how do we get back on track?
So excellent package of really important issues there, and I'll note that the magazine also has an article which I know we both think is pivotal, that talks about the fact that America is not racist. We're actually the least racist country on the face of the planet and in the history of mankind. But to that in a moment, because it does interface directly with this question about what's going wrong in our public schools. I actually recently, not only, do I have siblings who are teachers in the public schools, my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, everybody, a lot of teachers. And as you said, I've been in the university setting. I have 2 kids that are currently in a university setting. The reality is that the standards that we have always believed would never change are changing, and they're moving toward a subjectivity that is damaging to the idea that we as a country always shoot for the moon, so to speak, that we are in fact a shooting for the top. So what are the indicators? What are the data points that validate that and then cause us to have to look hard at how we keep teachers, but really a lot of these teachers are objecting to it too, but how we keep the system, the administrators, the unions honest. The United States comes in somewhere in terms of educational quality now. We continue to slip backwards. We're behind folks like Japan and Taiwan, and there's a list of countries we're behind. So if you look at the international comparative data, it tells us that we need to get back on teaching math and physics and writing and history as it really is. We know that political excuses are being made by school districts around the country, such that racism is being thrown up. For example, in California, they say that you could teach a different kind of math to different students based on their skin color. In other words, you can lower the standards in math because we really don't need to know it the way that we historically knew it, because that is too hard for some groups. Now, I would say to you now, isn't that innately racist in and of itself?
Sure.
The idea that somehow we're going to lower the standards because one ethnic group or another needs some extra attention. Maybe they need extra attention because there hasn't been enough quality education put out there. Interesting, the Black and Hispanic community dramatically increased their standing in the education data pool between 1990 and 2009. And only after we started pulling back on standards and lowering expectations. You're a mother, if you set expectations high, people perform to them. We know this about ourselves. If someone expects you to be able to do one more sit-up, one more push-up, maybe you can do it, okay? But right. People say, nah, don't worry about it, then you're not going to do it. And of course, the last thing I'll say about education is that the unions are overwhelmingly Democrat. They gave in the last cycle $32 million to Democrats. They're 94% Democrat supported in all these, the two major education unions. And they are dramatically undermining the very quality that Americans and particularly parents think they ought to have. Critical race theory is just one piece of this, Rebecca. The other piece that I'll just drive people to momentarily is this racism business, because nobody likes to talk about race. Because they say, well, you're going to call me a racist if I even open the conversation. Because why? Because in your book, I'm white and white privileged and all the rest of this. But here's the data that people don't realize. Of the 200 countries in the world, 19% of all immigrants come to the United States. They are virtually all minority, with very few exceptions. In the United States, 25% of all of our millionaires are Black, Hispanic, and Asian. 8 of the top billionaires of in the world are minorities. The polling data shows that the overwhelming majority of Americans actually not only think that legal immigration is good, but believe there could be either the same amount or more legal immigration in their neighborhood. By the way, what do minorities do when they get here? And of the 50,000 visas that are given under the diversity visa program every year, the majority go to Black African Americans, Africans that then become Americans legally. So the question I would have for you is there are lots of other data pools, but here's the point. If we're this incredible magnet, if Black families are sponsoring their own relatives to come here, if other Americans are sponsoring legal immigration to the United States, if most of the minorities actually move from the cities to the suburbs, which they do, another data set, because their income is rising, because there's upward mobility, because there's acceptance, because in this great world of otherness, we Americans are the other. We're the only country on the face of the planet that not only in our Constitution, but in our lives are basically an immigrant population with people that continue to be born here, reinforcing that psychology and that philosophy and that basic understanding. So where in the world? You're not going to find people migrating to Germany.
That's right.
From South America, or to Japan, or to Russia, or to China, or to Cuba. They're not migrating there. They're migrating here. Why? Because we are the least racist country on the face of the planet.
Yeah. And, I just had my nails done, Bobby, and you reminded me of a great story. As I was sitting in this chair, this lovely woman about my age with 4 boys, her oldest, 25 years old. She was Vietnamese, and she came to the United States about 20 years ago. And of her 4 boys, 2 of them have joined the U.S. Air Force, and they are active. They are her third boy, who's 13. She was telling me he so desperately wants to join. And I thought, wow, what did you do as a mother, and how does that make you feel? I was really curious. And she said it was something that both of them, my two older boys, both of them knew at a very young age this is what they wanted, because they heard the stories. They listened to their grandmother and their grandfather. They understood that America was a wonderful place to live. And they saw the way that we were able as a family to prosper here. We opened up our business. And it was just a beautiful story. And she proudly had her two boys in uniform, standing in front of the American flag, her oldest son going to Columbia University, having gone through boot camp and all of that stuff. And he's got a tremendous future ahead of him. And I thought, she said to me, Bobby, I don't understand. She was sort of whispering. She said, I don't understand how people here don't realize how great America is. I don't understand. She said, send them over to Vietnam. She said, every time we try to put something up or to speak our mind, she said, you're not allowed. She said, you'll get arrested. You can't speak. So I think, a lot of us are sort of spoiled, if you will. And it's easy when you're in a good place and you're sitting up high to sort of point the finger and say, oh, wouldn't this be nice? And, socialism, I think, is oftentimes what heaven probably looks like, where all things are equal. And, you're just, I think that is sort of a utopia that we dream of, right? And we imagine that all people will succeed no matter what, right? In heaven for sure. But here on earth, boy, we've got to recognize that it's not the way this planet works. And it's really not good for people. When you are developing as a young person, some of the best things that come out of, when you hear about stories of heroes, right? Of our past, you understand that often came with a lot of struggle and a lot of difficulty. So making life too easy for people because we're feeling sorry for people is not the answer. And that's really, I think, a lot of times what we're hearing in social groups. It's this idea of a perfect world, which will never exist here on Earth.
What a beautiful, beautiful story. And I'm just going to say this, Ronald Reagan used to say, let's be done with communism. It's not needed in heaven, and they've already got it in hell. It's interesting because that story is all about Columbia University, the service for the United States military. It's all about upward mobility and love of country. Those are the people. That psychology of I will take risks and I will make sacrifices for the ideals that make my life and my family's life possible. I mean, when those two young men are in uniform, they're in uniform in part for those they love, including their mother. They're in uniform because the ideals that make our lives possible are precious to them. And by the way, that story all by itself, with that Vietnamese businesswoman together with her family, her four, and those two actually are the exact answer to Marxism. Because Marxism says that we are in static classes. There's a proletariat, there's a bourgeoisie. Same thing, basically what happens with critical race theory is they replace class with race, and they say immovable, never. Because of your skin color, that will define you forever. You have no upward mobility because it's all defined by your skin color. Mm. Well, this gives the lie to that completely. The idea is America is that place in the world where we are defined by what risks we take. Our Constitution says you can be a lump on a log if you choose, or you can be the richest person you've ever met. You can go become a philanthropist. You can go into the American military. You can be a teacher. You can be anything you want to be. And what happens is people come here, like that Vietnamese family, and they say, oh my God, it's real. It's real. I can really do these things. And this is happening all over the world. I mean, I spent time in 50 countries, Rebecca. There is almost not a country, maybe some of the developed countries which have adopted our Constitution and who have adopted our perspective on freedom, people have a cultural affinity and would stay there. But there are a great many in poverty who would just do anything to get here and have that opportunity. So for Americans born here, not to appreciate that, never mind not to appreciate things like your grandfather, your father, fighting in the American military, being part of what makes the dream possible. You have to believe in the American dream or you're missing the boat. Yeah. You just don't understand all you've got around you. And then if you do believe in it, my feeling is you then have to take your appreciation to another level. A lot of people, members of AMAC, do that by being members of AMAC. But take it to another level and do everything you can in your power, in your community, to share this message. I'll say, Rebecca, I was at a dinner last night with a family, a very, very Christian family, a big family. And I said, by the way, are you members of AMAC? They said, we sure are. Hadn't come up before.
Great.
And they said, just a little question, would it be possible to get more of those magazines? Because ours gets read by everybody. So the point is, we're in a country where if you really want to realize the American dream, and AMAC fights for that every day, it's here for you. And God knows you need to be appreciative. You need to be grateful. You need to think about what that means. What is the obligation that puts on our shoulders to protect the future?
You know, I heard a beautiful song yesterday. I think it's Aaron Lewis, Am I the Only One? I believe the name of the song is, and it's a very powerful song because you may not want to hear it. He's got one or two words in there that you may not want your young children to hear, but it's a very powerful song in that he says, "Am I the only one that is willing to fight?" And you know that he would take a bullet for his red, white, and blue. He speaks of his father who came before him and fought, and how his children are looking to undo all of that which was done before so that we could enjoy this wonderful free country that we live in. So, and I just want to encourage people, you know, look out for the magazine if you want extra copies of this magazine, because you've even said it, Bobby, long before COVID, public education was in great trouble. And now we're seeing that with COVID, I think it gave, seems that there was more done in the realm of CRT. There was more time for people to speak or look at how, you know, what kind of program they were going to introduce to their classroom. I'm encouraging people now during the summer months, get involved. Go to amacaction.org. On our website, amacaction.org, we have a tremendous amount of information on critical race theory, and we are in the process of putting the final touches of really what you can do. We're creating a pamphlet that explains how to identify critical race theory, because it really is a moving target. It's hard to be specific and, you know, show you in black and white specifically, but we have that. We're putting everything that we've got. We're encouraging people, if you come across critical race theory in your school district, you have information, please send it to AMAC, because the more information that we have, the better that we can fight on your behalf. And we're doing that. We're doing that at the local level, on the state level, and of course at the federal level as well. So again, I love the cover. I think we all need to be reminded that here in America, it's not about the color of your skin. It never should be. It never should be. But Bobby, I want to shift to maybe some happier stories, some uplifting stories. You know so many great people. And, you know, I grew up in such a patriotic home, right, where we sang patriotic songs. My grandparents, they waved the Old Glory. You know, my father was very proud, and we understood, we revered. We had a certain humility about it, but we were also very proud American people. And some of the proudest people that I can think of are those men and women who have traveled off this planet to learn what's out there, right, and to visit the moon. You are a personal friend of Buzz Aldrin's. And so I wanted to shift there because, Bobby, throughout the years, you and I have shared some beautiful stories, and you've shared them with me, actually, and I'd love for you to share one or two with our listeners today. Yeah.
Well, and you know, Rebecca, you're right on in that you probably know that yesterday there's been some private sector activity in near Earth orbit, but yesterday was the 52nd anniversary, July 20, of the 1969 moon landing. And my relationship with some of the Apollo astronauts is really an accident of history, but my father worked for NASA. We, as a family with 4 young kids, when we were young, we were all completely imbued with the idea that American can do anything. Long before we ever stepped on the moon, there was the idea that this Gemini program and this Apollo program were absolutely going to do the thing that they set out to do. The same way Eisenhower said, we are going to keep we are going to take and keep Normandy and keep moving until we have ended World War II by taking out the leader of Germany at that time, Hitler. So the reality is, whether we're defeating evil or whether we're looking to the goodness in life, we Americans have this can-do mentality. So stories. Yes, by strange circumstance, Buzz Aldrin, Gene Cernan, who unfortunately we lost recently. I was talking yesterday to Apollo 7's Walt Cunningham, Charlie Duke, who was the Capcom, the communications commander who later walked on the moon himself, was the man who basically kept in communications with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins when they went out to the moon. So what happened? On the 16th of July, 1969, they headed out to the moon. They launched on the Saturn V, which was taller than the Statue of Liberty. They got out to the moon. It's an extraordinary process of doing that. And Buzz, Mike Collins, was in charge of the command module, and he orbited the moon. And again, this was 52 years ago yesterday. And 52 years, by the way, from Saturday was when they splashed down, this coming Saturday. But they got to the moon's surface. And there were all kinds of uncertainties, and both Armstrong and Aldrin would talk about those uncertainties. And privately, over 25 years of talking to him once or twice a week, sometimes more, Buzz has shared a lot of those stories, things that were not necessarily public. And so a couple of them are just fascinating. What people know, having seen the Apollo 11 movie, is that on their way down, they got the 1201 and 1202 alarms. These are alarms that in all of their years of training, they'd never gotten before. So they're on their way down to the surface of the moon. They're in something called the lunar module, which had a skin only as thick as basically three layers of tin foil. It looked like a spider. Why? Because there's no atmosphere on the moon, so you don't need aerodynamics. All you need to do is very gently set that lunar module down without crashing it on the surface. Well, as they came down, they got these abort alarms, and they had to make a decision with mission control. Do you keep going or not? Of course, they kept going. When they got down to near the surface, within, I think, 100 feet of the surface, they realized that the Sea of Tranquility was full of boulders and that there was also a crater there. And there are only these 4 little pads that had to be gently set down on the moon. So it wasn't going to work to land on boulders. So they kept going. By the time they finally set down, I can't remember how long between the alarm and when they eventually set down, but when they finally set down, they had something like 25 seconds of fuel remaining. And yet there they were, safely on the moon. A lot of what I marvel at is the presence of mind, the sense of confidence, the absolute can-do mentality of these men who went to the moon in order to show America's technological superiority. And when So Neil came out, said one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Buzz came out and described it as magnificent desolation. He said it was magnificent and it was desolate. So I thought magnificent desolation is a pretty good description. Little things that people don't know is, he said when he was climbing down the ladder, he sort of joked to the world, 600 million people watching, 20% of all mankind watching this. He joked, he said, well, I'm making sure to not lock the door behind me. And I've often joked with him about things that he said. And he said, well, the truth be told, even though that was sort of a joke, actually, if I pulled it tight, that could have created an airlock and we might not have gotten back in again. Wow. So he said that was important. So they got out on the moon, putting experiments out. I said, Buzz, so what was that like, putting out experiments? Well, we had the things we had to do. Were you thinking about Earth? No, not at all. They were thinking about, maybe except mission control. They had a job to do. They were trained to do it. Never mind that if they put their thumb up, they could cover all of humanity, just all of Earth with their thumb. Wow. You'd give you a shiver up your spine to think about being that far away. But, I said, so what, give me a surprise you encountered. Well, he said, one experiment I had to put out was had a level in it, because we had to put this experiment down level and have it pointing to the sun for the solar power. And he said, so there was a kind of level where you drop a BB in and it goes around and around until it ends up on a flat, and it needs to end up in the middle of that flat. He said, we hadn't really thought about the fact that with 1/6 gravity, that BB is going to go around and around and around and around and around. I said, so what'd you do? He said, well, then I went over and set up the other experiment. And then I came back and looked at this one, and it was level. I said to him, what about getting off the moon? Was that a challenge? And this is a story that I think he has seldom told, but it is absolutely riveting. And that is that When they climbed back into the lunar module, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, it is a stand-up environment. So it's not much bigger than the desk you and I are at, maybe plus a little bit. And it has, of course, equipment all around the interior, very thin skin. They climbed in. And when they had gone out onto the moon, they had push in, push out circuit breakers. And one of the things they did not want to have happen is accidentally, when they were on the moon, to have the ascent engine launch without them, because it's a push in. So what they did is they did the push in, push out, and it was out. So the circuit breaker it was out so that it couldn't launch without them in it. So they climbed back in again, and accidentally one of the backpacks snapped off the circuit breaker for the ascent engine. So Buzz, in telling the story, says, that was a rather serious moment. Sure. Because we realized that this was our only way off the moon. And so we said to Mission Control, as we went down through checklists, very calm in the transcript, but they said, and we've done this, we've broken off he said, probably it was me, broke off because it was on my side, he said, broke off the ascent engine toggle. And they said, well, we'll figure it out in the morning, just go to sleep. I said, so you just went to sleep, maybe thinking you might have an eternity on the moon? He goes, well, we didn't think about that. We just went to sleep. And we woke up the next morning and we said to Mission Control, so what's the plan for when going through the checklist and we're about ready to launch, what's the plan to reconnect up to Columbia? So they were in Eagle, they reconnect with the command module Columbia. What's the plan? They said, well, we haven't thought of anything. So Buzz said he thought, well, I could take a metal pen and I could push it in, but that conducts electricity. So that's not going to work. I could use my little finger to push it in, but I conduct electricity, so that wouldn't work. So he said, I ended up having a felt tip pen. And he said, I said, why'd you have a felt tip pen? He said, it wasn't even on the manifest. It's just that I like big black check marks on checklists, and a felt tip pen would give me that. So by God's grace, the felt tip pen, which didn't conduct, is how they got off the moon. He pushed it in with a felt tip pen, the ascent engine lit, they rejoined Mike, and 3 days later they were here. But these are men who risked everything, Rebecca, for America. They were all fighter pilots, talking to Walt Cunningham and Buzz yesterday. They were both Korean War fighter pilots. They had given their life already on paper to the country. At one point I said to Walt, did you ever think hard about the fact that when you got in Apollo 7, which was the first manned flight after the first one burned on the pad, killing 3 men. I said, did you ever think that was risky? And he sort of looked at me as if to say, I need to help you understand my mindset. He said, we made that decision years and years earlier. We were already committed to the idea that if we died for our country, that was fine. So no, honestly, I never worried about it. He said the engineers had their job. I had my job. My job was to get on that candle. And when the candle lit, to go do what I had to do. And that's the mentality, Rebecca, that has built this country. We are a people blessed beyond any ability to comprehend the number of lives both lived and dying in combat that make possible this podcast, make possible the meals that we eat, the roof over the heads of everybody watching this. This all comes from the sacrifice of some amazing people.
Yeah. Bobby, thank you. This story, it's so beautiful, and it is really reminiscent of the can-do attitude. You mentioned it earlier. In other words, I love America because we're free. And I love America because you can really be what you want to be. And we ought to encourage our children. We ought to not set limits and say, you are limited because of the color of your skin, or you are an oppressor because of the color of your skin, or a victim to this or that. Instead, let's talk about the heart and the spirit and the perseverance and the resilience. And I think that that's what makes America so wonderful, is that I think that at the heart of the American people, we're such a strong people. And so we're going to keep working, Bobby, to make sure that our young people, especially our young people, our future generations, have the same opportunities that men like, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had these opportunities. Now, as for me, I'd be so afraid. I could never do that. It's one thing when I think of that, it puts me in panic mode. I have such respect for anyone who can put themselves in that position and have a strong enough mind to recognize that there are lots of risks, but it is a different way of thinking, I bet, for sure.
Rebecca, you and many AMAC members probably share your view that going into space or being, and I've never been in space, but being, let's say, on a fighter jet would be problematic in their own thinking. But we all have our own gifts, and we all have our own kinds of courage. And the kind of courage that you represent, the kind of courage that AMAC members represent, is a different kind of courage, equally vital. Speaking out, speaking up, and being willing to be counted in the larger scheme of things. And it's so some of the things that you describe remind me that one of the people I worked for was Colin Powell. And here's a black man who becomes, and by the way, never mentioned race to me, not once in all of our years of working together. Not important. What matters is merit. What matters is commitment. What matters is right here. It's the heart. It's whether or not you're going to give your all. So here's a man that became 4-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. When you're going to get your expert medal, which I know Dave and others would quickly confirm here, there's no affirmative action. You either hit the shot or you don't. Okay. And in combat, you either make the mark or you don't. And in leadership and in the military, you either make the mark or you don't. And that's one of the beautiful things about our military. It has always been historically merit-based. Yes, there has been prejudice in the past, and we have worked to resolve that away, just as the 13th and 14th Amendment and the 19th Amendment got rid of things that we should have gotten rid of even earlier. But the reality is that we're a society where, for all the friction that exists, there is this tremendous opportunity to achieve and to be, as you said a moment ago, Rebecca, anything you want to be. So Colin Powell wanted to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs and also became an exceptional Secretary of State. And here's a man that made no excuses for anything. What he did, and he was national security advisor for Ronald Reagan. Don't forget, when they brought down the Soviet Union, and he learned a lot from Reagan. But the reality is, he believed in his own dream. And he made commitments, and he sacrificed, and he made investments in himself. And that's why, for example, those of us who have educational loans and have gone through, I have no problem whatsoever with educational loans. And I have no problem with the idea that people should invest in themselves, because it causes you to earn everything that you get. The Marines have a famous statement, beyond Semper Fi. They say, earned, not given. And that whole point is, we in America have a chance to earn all the respect, all of the opportunities that we're willing to put our mind to and get up early to go achieve. And there are very few places in the world that even come close, and there's no one else that has ever done the things that America has done. We've saved Europe twice from collapse in world wars. Our Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of white Americans died to free black Americans. Mm-hmm. We went to the moon. There is no country on the face of the earth or in the history of humankind that has done what America has done. And I think we just have to sometimes take a deep breath and say, I am so blessed just to wake up in the morning in this country, and I will do everything in my power to protect it.
Amen. Bobby, what a beautiful way to wrap this up. I love that, on a very good and positive note. And to all of you listening, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Bobby will be with me again next week. This is Reb and Rob on Truth and History. Please share this podcast with your friends and family, and tune in, because we'll be sharing with you a lot of information. We'll have some very interesting guests in the coming weeks. And don't forget to join or renew your AMAC membership. Just simply go to amac.us. You can do it right there for $16 a year. You are automatically subscribed to the AMAC magazine. You'll receive a bi-monthly magazine. And we are reporting on issues and topics that you will simply not see anywhere else. We've got a ton of great information coming. So folks, go to amac.us, get involved, tell your friends and family all about us. Until next time, folks, this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.